Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, as we continue through history with American Girl, we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. So, in when they came out, I can't remember, it was like early 2000s, they came out with two friend dolls, and their series is combined. So they each have 3 books that focus on them. So you have Marie Grace Gardner and Cecile Ray. So Marie Grace is a white girl whose father is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but her mother was from a little town outside New Orleans in Louisiana. And that's where these stories take place. They take place from January to December of 1853 in New Orleans, Louisiana. So Marie Grace's father is a doctor. Her mother and her little brother died about 4 years ago of cholera. So they died in a cholera epidemic, and her Marie Grace took her, and they left town, and they've kind of been going around the New England area where her father's been working as a doctor. So that is kind of her background. Cecile Ray was born and raised in New Orleans. She is African American. Her family is free blacks. They are very wealthy. She does not go to school. She has a private tutor. They have a cook. They actually have an Irish maid. So she also has an older brother who shows up, and he comes from being in school in Paris, France. And they do speak a great deal of French here. So yes, this is during the time of slavery. This is before the American Civil War. But again, Cecile's family is wealthy and they are black. And yes, slaves are definitely mentioned in these books. So let's start off with the first book. So this is Meet Marie Grace. So it's how she comes comes back to New Orleans. So it talks about her family and friends. She has her father, who's a doctor, who I don't believe they ever give a first name. Miss Curtis, who is their housekeeper for the last 4 years. So she's not from New Orleans either. You have Marie Grace herself. You have her uncle Luke, who is her uncle from her mother's brother, and he is a Mississippi steamboat pilot. And then you have her dog Argos. Then you meet Mademoiselle Orleans. She is a French opera singer who gives voice lessons. Then you have Lavinia Halesworth, who is a wealthy girl who likes to be the boss. Marie Grace ends up going to a private Catholic school. And then you have Cecile Ray, a confident girl who takes voice lessons with Mademoiselle Orchan. Right? So this takes place, it starts off in January of 1853. So in this story, basically they come back. She meets Cecile at the opera where her uncle takes her. She starts learning to help people. That's her big thing. And getting, I believe it's helping hand here. What one of course is. Oh yes. Her father helps 2 little black boys who may or may not be free. They're probably free black boys who are injured. And then here, I can pull up the picture. She's very good at helping her father. Remember, I can't remember whether they're 9, 10 years old at the time. But she goes to school. She learns that she's different. Now, she doesn't speak French. She probably did when she was a little bit younger. But again, it's the 1800s. So Louisiana it's passed around a little bit. So it wasn't originally a British colony. In fact, it was never a British colony. It belonged to the French, then it belonged to the Spanish, then it belonged to the French again, and then Napoleon sold it to Thomas Jefferson. So most of the people there still speak French, though a lot of, I think, the architecture in New Orleans, even particularly in the French Quarter, is very, very Spanish. So, but again, she learns about school. She gets the invitation to I believe it's a Mardi Gras ball. And that's where she goes to one children's ball and Cecile Ray goes to a different one because they're still separate. Kind of the separate but equal thing. That is kind of the way it is in New Orleans to an extent. Again, it's a very metropolitan city. At the time, it was the second largest city in the United States. So very, very different than what you would see today, where it has one of the highest crime rates in the country. Louisiana, of course, is very, very poor right now. But back then, no. It was the end of the Mississippi River. Everything came through there. It was, and of course, slaves and the plantations. Can't forget those. Yeah, it does show that where they see a boy who apparently at this time, because the British have taken over, African Americans have to carry papers to prove they're not slaves. So that is something that's shown up in the beginning of this book. But it ends with a masquerade ball where Cecile and Marie Grace are dressed the same and they switch places. So that's the first book. That's where we meet Marie Grace. And then we meet Cecile. So this is Cecile's first book. And so her friends and family, she has her father. Her father owns he's a sculptor. So he owns, I'm trying to think, it's a stone yard. So he makes fancy sculptures. And then her mother, who is she's a businesswoman. So, and then you have Cecile. Then you have her brother Armand, who's been studying in France. Her grandpère, he's a retired sailor. Her aunt, Octavia, and Cecile's nephew Rene, who's Octavia's son. She's widowed, and they come to live with the family. Of course, you have Marie Grace and Mademoiselle Auchan in this, and then you have Mathilde, who's the Ray's housekeeper and cook, and then Ellen, who's the housemaid, and she's Irish. So in this story, of course, you have her talking about the free people of color, meeting Marie Grace, the Mardi Gras season, and getting things dressed up. You have that, you have the crossover where they meet and do the Mardi Gras ball. And then when her brother comes back, he doesn't want to be a sculptor. He wants to be a painter. So that's kind of what you learn in this book. And then we have the next book. So this is Marie Grace. This second book, again, they have different names. So this is Marie Grace and the Orphans. In this story, Marie Grace is home alone. Her father is out working because then he makes house calls, and a baby is dropped at the door. Basically, she hears a knock. I think her father had hired a housemaid, but she and their housekeeper didn't get along. Her housekeeper's she's racist. And she doesn't like New Orleans at all. She does not like the food. Again, she's from the New England area. So she's not particularly happy. And she's a widow, so she's being paid. This is another white woman. So, but yeah, she does not like New Orleans food. She's very, very bossy. She loves Marie Grace and Marie Grace's father, and I think she tolerates Argos, which is Marie Grace's rather large dog, who she's had since she was little, which was actually given to her as a puppy by her Uncle Luke. So he's already there. But in this one, she finds a baby abandoned at her father's doorstep. And her father comes and he looks at the baby, and it's very, very pale. And they take care of it a little bit. Their neighbor nurses it. Then a slave owner shows up and he claims that the baby is the newborn of one of his runaway slaves. Marie Grace's father gets away with this by saying, well, the baby was sickly and now you have to pay this giant bill. And so the guy goes away. And they end up taking the baby to a white orphanage. And she eventually, at first, she gets Cecile's help. And Cecile's mother knows one of the nuns. And so they're able, whether this baby is mixed race or not, it might be, basically get into a white orphanage. Get him, and so to basically protect him from going into slavery. So, and and then Marie Grace starts volunteering there. And at first, I think this is when, because most of these stories take place during the yellow fever epidemic, which hits that summer. And I think at the end, because it has desperate measures, get to this, because I think the yellow fever epidemic hits. Yeah. The yellow fever epidemic hits, and Marie Grace at first lies. She doesn't want Philip, which is the baby, to go away, but she realized it's safer for him to go with this other nun to, I believe it's Chicago. And so she basically, she tells the truth, so this other nun is able to take him away. And also to, because he's a baby, escape the yellow fever epidemic. Because that's when this starts. Because at the time, New Orleans, again, they did not know this. So let's kind of be clear. Yellow fever is spread by mosquitoes. This is New Orleans. One, it's filthy. It's the 1800s. Two, giant lake, giant river, surrounded by swamps, people gathering water everywhere. Yeah, it's a mosquito breeding ground. They did think it was caused by miasma, which is bad air. So that was the medical theory at the time. Again, this was still a time where they were dealing with I believe the four humors were still believed, which means they were bleeding people and doing all sorts of things. So yellow fever could be extremely deadly. However, Marie Grace and her father had both had it already in the past. And so and most of the people who lived in New Orleans were locals, had it already. So they were less likely to catch it. But a lot of the new people who were coming in, the Americans, as they call them, that's one of the things you've learned, I think, in one of the first two books, is they call them the Americans because, again, a lot of these people had been either Spanish or French, mostly French, for most of their family's generations. So they hadn't been part of the United States for that long. Not to mention, again, this is 1853. The United States hadn't been around for that long. Hadn't been around. The president who bought it was Thomas Jefferson, who I think was second or third president of the United States. So yeah, still pretty young country. So, but a lot of people were gonna start getting sick, and they would always have a few cases, but not devastating. This starts the devastation. So then we move into, I think this is book 4, yeah. So we have moving into troubles for Cecile. So in this book, the epidemic really starts to hit. So it starts off with whispers where you're starting to hear like a lot of people are dying, and then it starts raining. It's summer. I think this is in June. It's either June or July, or both, of 1853. So people start leaving. A lot of her friends, the wealthy African Americans, start leaving town. A lot of the wealthy whites have left town. They go to country houses. Anybody who can leave town does. So Cecile's family stays. Obviously, Marie Grace, they're not wealthy. Let's be clear. Marie Grace's father, they are not wealthy. They're probably middle class because her father's a doctor, but they have a housekeeper, but they're not, of the two, Cecile is the one who's more of the upper class. So basically it's the start of the pandemic, and her and Marie Grace start helping at the orphanage because it explodes. Well, not physically, but they start getting a lot of children because children are losing parents. One parent, two parents. The yellow fever doesn't discriminate. It just kills everybody. So, I do believe her brother gets, yeah, her brother catches it, and so does Elaine, and Elaine dies. So their Irish maid actually dies of it. And then Mademoiselle Ocean gets it as well. And by this time, she's engaged to Marie Grace's uncle. So, so I believe, yeah, that's the yellow fever. It's definitely talking about the yellow fever. I do believe her. They're at the time, they're shooting cannons. They're burning tar, trying to get the bad air to go away, because that's what they think is causing it. So I do believe, yes. A lot of the houses are dark because people are leaving town, or they're just dying. And yeah, her brother gets sick. They do a lot of days of prayer. Cecile's spending a lot of time at the orphanage with Marie Grace, where they're helping take care of the children. And they end up going to the church because the mayor of the town calls the church, and that's when Cecile finds out from Marie Grace that their opera teacher has yellow fever, and she's very, very sick. So, and that's kind of, yeah, because also Cecile gets to Marie Grace, and Marie Grace sends her father to their home, to Cecile's home, and her father, apparently Cecile's father is reluctant to talk to an actual doctor. It's not unusual. They didn't actually have anything that was going to help yellow fever, and occasionally bleeding. That's good for people who are sick with a virus, but again, they didn't know. But somehow Marie Grace was able to help get Cecile Grace's father, Dr. Gardner, was able to help Armand. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to help Elaine. So that is, and they light candles, and I do believe, are they? Yeah, they're in St. Paul's Cathedral. I don't have pictures of it. I have somewhere. I've seen it. I have a picture of it somewhere. My husband and I were actually in New Orleans once when I was pregnant with my daughter. It smells. But I was in my second trimester of pregnancy. So it wasn't my favorite place. But that's back to this story. So that's what's going on. At the end of this book is they find out that Mademoiselle Ocean is very, very sick, and they're hoping she's going to get better. So the next book is the last book for Marie Grace. So this is Marie Grace Makes a Difference. It's getting later in the year, so it talks about her family and friends. You have so many orphans because they are a desperate mission. So her father, what happens is things are getting bad. Marie Grace's father wants to send her out of town to her mother's family, but she doesn't want to go. So she's able to help convince the nuns at the orphanage to let her stay because their housekeeper has left town. I don't even know if she ever comes back. I don't think it mentions whether she comes back or not. But just before her father's about to put her on the steamship, the nuns say that she's help, and she goes and stays at the orphanage to help out at the orphanage. And then eventually she's able to convince her Uncle Luke and the nuns at the hospital, which is where her opera teacher is, to let her go see her. And she's able to help her kind of wake up, and she wakes up and she needs ice, and she's able to take ice to her, and she sings to her, and that kind of wakes her up. And that's basically the basic of this book, is her trying to stay. And here we have a picture of Marie Grace and her soon-to-be aunt. So, and then, yeah, she's about to be sent away, but her father, she's able to stay back. And once October, so this hits October. And once it cools down, the mosquitoes start dying off and things get better. Yellow fever is mostly, it's in the summer. And it comes through the ships because the ships come from places like Cuba and the Caribbean where it never cools down. So it's yellow fever's rampant all the time. So, and it does come from West Africa. It came over on the ships, which is the reason I believe I looked up on this. There was a prevailing false theory that Africans and African slaves were immune to yellow fever, which they're not. It's just a lot of them had it who had just come over. I had already had it. So that's the reason they lived. It's not that they didn't die, because I know at least some of Cecile's friends or their families do in fact die, and they are in fact afraid. So, and eventually I believe this ends with her with Madame Ocean and her Uncle Luke's wedding, and her gift, she makes a difference, and she sings at her aunt and uncle's wedding. So, and then we have the last book, which is Cecile's Gift. So it's now, I think it's still October or maybe November. So in this one, they do introduce another character, which is Perrin Dupre, who's staying at the orphanage. Her brother is sick. So yeah, this is October of 53. So this is where it ends. So there's an invitation. They're going to have a big, I'm trying to think what the word is, event to raise money for the orphans, because they got a lot of orphans. And Cecile wants to read a poem, but when she reads it to the children of the orphanage, who this is for, they don't like it. So Marie Grace, who had just been recently pushed by Cecile to sing with her aunt, who's an opera singer, pushes Cecile to write her own poetry. So, and that's what really this is about. And that's when also Marie Grace leaves, because she goes to visit her mother's family with her uncle and her new aunt. So that is these books. So that's the end. So that's all 6 books. These are really interesting because, again, you're going back and forth, and it's just 1 year. It's not traditional. It does talk a little bit about their schooling, but it mostly revolves around the yellow fever epidemic. But what I find really interesting is you get a different look at African Americans, because you see the slaves, but then you see these free blacks and the wealthy free blacks. Because, again, Cecile's family, her brother was off going to school in Paris. So they have money and they have status in New Orleans. It's separate status, but they have status, which is a little bit different. They do not bow down to the whites as much. You do not see that, but you don't see a lot of their interactions with the wealthy whites that much, just because Marie Grace isn't part of that. But it is an interesting look at the world of New Orleans in this part right before the American Civil War, and not too long after it's become part of the United States, where you really do have the blacks and whites mixing, where you have a mixture of slaves. They do mention that some blacks do in fact own slaves, though Cecile's grandfather makes a point saying, we would never do that. We would never own another human being. You also see that Marie Grace's father, not surprising, he's from Pennsylvania. He never mentions it, but you can guess that he doesn't support slavery by the way he treats the slaver in one of the books, and how he protects the baby, because he does not, and how he automatically treats 2 little black boys. All right, so I have a crying sick kid. That is all for now. If you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thank you.